You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and thanks for coming back to the show. And believe me, we've got quite the show today. Firstly, let's welcome you back to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And I'm your host, Steve Adams, on Mighty Blue. Now, I normally have 3 bits of audio, but today we've got 5 to fit in. There are reasons for this, of course, and they will become apparent as the show goes on. We've still got our main guests. We still have Kate, or Phoenix, and we still have Grandma Gatewood, who decides that the best way to celebrate a through hike of the Appalachian Trail in your 60s is to go and do it again. Now, who on earth will be so daft as to do that? This week's main guest is Keith Foskett, or Fozzie. Keith very kindly gave me permission to read his Appalachian Trail through hiking book, Balancing on Blue, which I will do when Grandma Gatewood stops climbing mountains. That's going to be in a couple of weeks' time. But Keith has quite the hiking pedigree, so I thought I'd bring him on the show and we chat about that. Then we'll have Phoenix, our woman of a certain age, and if you recall, she was starting to struggle last week with her ankle really playing up. And I admit that I and some of you, well, we had our concerns. She texted me on Thursday last week and said that a lot has gone on. So I got on the phone and, well, you can hear about what happened after Keith. Then, before we get on to Grandma Gatewood, I've got 2 more bits of audio to share, but let's just let it unwind. So sit back, grab a coffee, and listen to Keith Foskett, or Fozzie. I'm so pleased to be able to introduce our guest today, partly to thank him because he recently gave me permission to read his Appalachian Trail story on the show. The book is Balancing on Blue, and this is Keith Foskett, or Fozzie. Hi Fozzie, how are you?
I'm good, Steve. Thanks. How are you?
Well, I'm better now. We've taken a long time to make
a few technical issues, but I think we're there finally.
The latest technical issue was when he had to call his neighbour to stop hammering, and it turns out it was his neighbour's wife. So that was impressive. Well, first of all, thanks for letting me read an Englishman's book on the show. I won't have to apologise for some of the awful accents that I've used in the past. And I believe we're both from the south. Is that right? You off from the south?
Yes, West Sussex, about halfway between Brighton and London, which kind of makes it a bit more visual.
Right. Well, I'm not terribly sure whether... I mean, I can tell the difference in our accents. I'm not sure how well our American listeners will be able to tell the difference, but we should sound relatively similar, hopefully.
I think they can probably understand us with a bit of luck.
Yeah, it should be okay. I don't need subtitles from a podcast.
No.
Yeah. And before we move on, why is the book called Balancing on Blue? Why are you balancing on blue?
That's a good question. And do you know, you're the first person that's ever asked me that, even though I did put, well, it's probably because I put a description in the book of why I called it what I did. It was 2 things that kind of came together. First of all, I remember there was one day I was on a particular section. I can't remember what the section was, but it was quite sort of a narrow ridge and it was on a slanted piece of rock. So you had to kind of negotiate this slanted section of rock, kind of almost like doing some sort of balancing act. So
right,
that was
the knife's edge. Was that the knife's edge?
It wasn't the knife edge. No, it was. I think it was somewhere near Roanoke. It is in the book. It just slipped my mind. And the second part, which I'm sure you're aware of, and everybody else that's walked the AT, is when you've got a view, or the rare occasions when you've got a view in the evening, and you can see the distant hills. You can normally see like 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 overlapping hills fading off towards the distance, and they're all blue.
It's magnificent.
You'd kind of expect them to be sort of, well, I suppose you'd expect them to be green, but they're not. They're blue.
Yeah.
So, and I remember sitting there just looking at them, and the first thing that went through my head was, I wonder if there's someone sitting on that hill over there looking over here, wondering if there's anybody looking back over that way, sort of thing.
And that's why you balanced on blue.
But that was it. Yeah, it was just balancing on blue. So that's how it kind of came about. Totally unintentional, but
But some of those views you do get, you're absolutely right. Yes, there's a haze that's there, isn't there? And I'm not sure. Yeah. It may be a reflection from the sky. I'm just not sure. But
I don't know how it happens. It's a lovely thing to look at though in the evening.
Absolutely, yeah. So how did you get into hiking long distance trails? Because I mean, hiking is popular in the UK and Europe, obviously.
Yep. But
we've got nothing like the AT in the UK, certainly, or the PCT. In the UK, that is. What sparked your imagination in the first place, being brought up in West Sussex?
I think my parents are probably responsible for the love of the outdoors. I mean, we used to go walks. Used to go for walks. The earliest I can remember when I was a small child. Then we had a dog, so walking almost became sort of like a daily thing. But it wasn't until, I suppose, I mean, I spent my teens and my sort of 20s. I went for the occasional hike. I sort of went camping, but only sort of a week here and there.
Yeah.
And then I was working at a yoga retreat in Greece, of all places, and I was chatting to a Kiwi guy in a bar, and he said he'd just come back, or a friend of his had just come back from Spain, having hiked a 500-mile-old pilgrim's route.
Yeah.
And I was looking for something to do because my work at the yoga centre was just about to finish. This was late July, so there was August and September left of the summer. And the more he started describing it to me, over the course of a 10-minute conversation at the end of it, I just decided I was going to do it. And I went back home. I did a bit of Googling, found out where it was, all the information that was required. And I went out there and did it. I ended up putting a 500-mile section on before it. So I had sort of 500 miles in France, then 500 miles in Spain, so 1,000 miles in total.
Nice.
And in case anybody who's listening who hasn't realised, it's the Camino de Santiago is the route, which is hugely popular.
Well, of course, all the best ideas do come out of conversations with Kiwis in pubs, don't they?
They do, generally, so? Yeah. I think that's the only one I've had with a Kiwi in a pub. But yeah, it was certainly a good outcome.
So you didn't cut your teeth in the UK then? You decided to go straight for a big one straight away?
Well, no, I did in terms of sort of like hiking and overnighting, but only, yeah. I mean, my local trail, I think, was the first one I did, which is the South Downs Way. It's about 100 miles or, sort of 4 or 5 days. So that was the first one I did. But I decided on the Camino, because I knew I could possibly be out there come sort of October. I figured on an 8-week walk. And England, the seasons tend to turn in September, and October can go one of two ways. It can be reasonable, yes, or it can be cold, or it could be wet. And I knew in Spain in October, you could probably still be walking around in shorts and a T-shirt. So
sure.
I guess it was.
But you can also get snow. I went in October when I did my Camino, and we got snow. So that was interesting.
I did we got a couple of days towards the end. I didn't even know you'd done the Camino.
Yeah, I did that in 2018, and that's going to be my next book, funny enough.
I had no idea. Congratulations.
And the Camino itself, I actually started Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which was the beginning of the Pyrenees. But that is a dreadful start for a first day over the Pyrenees. That's horrendous, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I must admit, I found that tough. So you had a little bit of a 500-mile warm-up. So where did you actually start your Camino then?
I started in a place called, you might have to excuse my French pronunciation, but I think it's Le Puy-en-Velay, which is near Lyon, Lyon, and it's sort of south east France.
So is that another one of the various different ways that do lead to the way? Is that literally part of the official way?
Yeah, it's called, that particular route from there to Saint-Jean on the border is, that route is called Via Pedensis, which I didn't actually know until about 4 months ago.
And what was that like then, that one? Because I know I enjoyed mine being in Spain. What was it like going through France?
It was lovely. I love France anyway. I always kind of think of it as England in the fact that I think it's got less population and it's a bigger country, so it seems a lot less crowded. The countryside is kind of familiar to England. Same sort of trees and that sort of thing. Yeah, I loved it. Absolutely adored it.
So, and I've looked on your website for some answers to a couple of questions about you. And one of the things that you use, a word on your website that I'd never heard of before, called dromomania, which is an addiction to wandering and exploring. What does that mean to you? And how do you know you've got it?
I think I've got I don't know if it's actually a recognised condition or not. sometimes I think, someone's just invented it because it's a loose description of people that do these, just go off walking somewhere. I think I've probably got a little bit of Dromomania, certainly a lot of wanderlust, certainly a lot of yearning for sort of freedom to be away from society. But the Dromomania one's an interesting one. I'd never heard of the word until I think about, just before I wrote the book. And I think it comes from the Latin dromos, which I think is to run, and mania, which is borderline insanity. So
well, there is that, of course.
Your average nutter. So I think I fit into that bracket quite well. I think mania is a little bit unfair because it makes it sound like an illness or some sort of bad thing that you have to sort of rectify or cure yourself. And like I said, I don't know if it's a recognised condition or not. But when I first read about it, there was a French guy they used as an example. I think he lived in Paris and just decided he was going to walk one day, and he ended up in Moscow a few months later.
As you do.
But it's a wonderful word. It's a really nice
it is.
word.
It's a great word. And I decided to look it up in the dictionary. It is a real thing.
Oh, okay.
The dictionary defines it as an exaggerated desire to wander. So when you hike, what are you looking for? Is it the exercise, the solitude, the camaraderie? Are you trying to discover history, or what is it that you feel? Is it that solitude you referred to just now?
There's a lot of things. There's the history, there's the wilderness aspect, there's the social aspect to an extent. But to me, it is the solitude, more easily obtainable, say, on routes like the Continental Divide or the Pacific Crest Trail. Certainly not on the Camino or the Appalachian Trail, but even then, to an extent, you can.
Very much so. You can. You can have entirely lone hike if you want to, and they certainly are this year. They certainly are this year, aren't they?
Yeah, that you can. Yeah, for sure. I think it is definitely the solitude thing, and it's also just getting away from society. I mean, I suppose I have a few issues in society, but it's the way we're kind of forced to live. How we're sort of dictated to by the governments, and how we're supposed to live in a democracy, which I don't think we do, despite apparently we do live in a democracy, but it doesn't seem like that at times. And sometimes when it just gets too much, I've been accused of running away, as a lot of thru hikers have. You're just running away from your problems and all that sort of thing. And it's not that; it's just a complete change of scenery. You wake up in a tent in the middle of the nowhere every morning. All you can hear is a little bit of bird song. You've got no alarm calls, the phone isn't going, you don't have to answer your emails. And it's just, it is an escape, but not an escape out of weakness. And it's an escape out of, for me, and I think a lot of people, a necessity just to get out there and, spend a few weeks or a few months just recharging and reevaluating. And I think we come back recharged and better people for it.
For a lot of people, they think it's very transitional in their life, and can transform people as well. Do you find that the hikes have transformed you in many ways, or have you just, as you said, reset and revitalised?
Well, the first one, the Camino, definitely changed me because although I wasn't sort of lost at the time. My life didn't really have any sort of direction, certainly in terms of work and a career. And I remember when I started it, I had no intention of writing a book whatsoever. And by the time I'd finished and got back to England, I'd started writing. So for me, that was the sort of turning point in realising what I wanted to do, which was writing. And thankfully, that's what I did. And it's a reasonably successful pastime. It's worked for me, and I didn't think I'd be any good at it, but the books sell and apparently people like them, so I guess there's something in it. So I did come back a completely changed person in that respect.
And did people notice that? Do people notice that in you? And because people have noticed differences in me since I came back from my hikes. I'd never hiked before when I did it at the age of 61, and I changed quite a bit as well. What do you think you picked up most of all when you went hiking for that first time?
I think I come back a lot more chilled. I often kind of refer to it as there's sort of two versions of you. There's the person that's hiking out on the trail.
Sure.
And I often picture myself back home back at home and in society or whatever, it sounds a bit strange one to explain, but, I see myself sort of sitting at my desk, or at that point, I see myself going sort of to work. And when you've got all this time, this headspace to think, which I don't think we get in everyday life, we just don't get a chance to literally sit down and think. We think we
That's
do,
right.
but we don't. We grab maybe like a couple of minutes just as we're falling asleep. But when you're hiking, all you've got to do is concentrate on where you're putting your feet, basically. So your head's clear to go into all these subjects and thoughts in real depth and over a huge amount of time. And for me, I started seeing what I was doing wrong in my normal life and the mistakes I was making, and how I could correct those, be a better person. And once you've digested and thought about all this stuff for up to sort of 6 months when you're hiking, you come back and you've unintentionally got an action plan, and you're excited to sort it out.
I must admit, though, I found after about 800 miles, I was driving myself crazy. In the end, I had to put headphones in to start listening to music, because I was literally driving myself bonkers just talking to myself.
I know a lot of people
making
do.
Mistakes.
I know a lot of people. I did listen to music occasionally, but I mean, I was perfectly happy in my own head for long periods of time. I was fine with it.
Now, I know that you mentioned the Continental Divide and the Pacific Crest, so you've done the Triple Crown and a couple of Caminos, because you didn't just do the first Camino, did you? Did you go again for a particular reason, or was that you just wanted to do the whole thing again?
Yeah, the first time I did it was in 2002.
Right.
I did.
You've done it more than twice. Then you've done it.
I've done it three times. Yeah. So 2002, I went back. I think it was 2014 to do it again, just because I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
See how it had changed, and I also got asked by an American company that were developing guides at the time to go back a third time and log it with photos and GPS, so they could do a map out of it. I'd have to correct you. I'm not a Triple Crowner.
I thought you were.
No, I've done the PCT and the AT. I went out to do the CDT in 2015, and I was about 550 miles in the New Mexican wilderness, and I had to get choppered out with what they thought was bronchitis, but it turned out to be pneumonia.
Oh, good Lord. Sorry, I didn't know that.
No, it's fine. The prognosis was, I think, 6 weeks rest, at which point I thought, I'm not sitting in a motel for 6 weeks waiting for, to sort myself out, so I came back home.
So was the Triple Crown, that's not important to you then, is it? Or were you doing the CDT because you would then wanted to have a completion of your 3 books of the AT, the PCT and the CDT?
There was, the two main reasons was it obviously would make a hell of a trilogy, the big 3 trails, and obviously it's a hell of a accolade to, I mean, I didn't do it for, the accolade or the medal, but it's a nice thing to, it's a nice thing to have. A Triple Crowner is a huge achievement, so...
Yes, I totally agree. I'm thinking of going for my Triple Crown of the Appalachian Trail, the same trail every time, though. So, which one did you find the toughest, by the way?
I think the AT.
All right.
You kind of look at them, and the PCT is about, I think, 400 miles longer, but the AT's, it was just the hills on the AT. There's no such thing as an easy hill on the AT. There's no such thing as a switchback. If they're going up over a hill, they go up over a hill and down the other side. The PCT, the hills tend to have more switchbacks in, and they're longer over a more sort of distance. And I think the AT, I've read on several occasions, the AT's got more elevation gain than the PCT anyway. So you're actually
much
doing
more
climbing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 16 times Mount Everest apparently, which is nearly half a million feet of elevation.
Something like that.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely ridiculous.
It is.
So did your hiking then become really the first hike was a catalyst to write a book? Then did you decide, once you decided to write the book, you then were hiking to write, or are you a writer who likes to hike, or you're a hiker who likes to write? What do you think? What do you see yourself as right now?
The second trail was the PCT. I won't deny I thought it would make a great book, which is why I did it. But I think in terms of a percentage split, my desire to go and walk it was about 80%, and the book was about 20%.
All right.
The Appalachian Trail was after that, and at that point it was still... the whole adventurous freedom thing, but I knew at the end of it there'd hopefully be a half decent book in that as well. So it kind of started out as just a hiking thing, and it's kind of progressed as sort of like a split. I mean, I don't think I'd go and do a long hike to write a book. I'd always go and do a long hike because I want to go and do a long hike, the fact that I can get a book out of it as well is just sort of like an added bonus at the end.
Sure. And do you take different things from your hikes? Quite apart from, forget the book part of it. Do you learn different things about yourself on the hikes? And is the difference from one hike to another hike significant enough to make a difference to how you come out of that hike?
I know I learned on the Appalachian Trail that I really don't like rain. That was one thing I definitely did learn.
That'll definitely teach you.
I learned on the Pacific Crest Trails that bears do scare the crap out of me, and so do rattlesnakes.
Yes.
Have I learned anything? Only to not be, it sounds a bit cliched, but only to not be afraid of taking your life in a direction that, when you kind of look at it, seems really risky. I mean, most people, that have kind of like a solid job and a good career won't give that up to go and hike a trail because they don't want to risk it. But for me, it was all about following a route. I wasn't particularly happy before I went to do the Camino, and it was an escape to figure out what I wanted to do, but it was more don't be afraid of making a decision despite how risky it seems. If it kind of feels, for me, if it feels right in my stomach and my heart, despite my head saying you need to think about this really carefully, if it feels right in my heart, then I go and do it. And I don't think there's any occasion where I've based a decision on my heart and my emotions where it hasn't worked out for the better.
I think I noticed quite a significant difference between my 2014 hike and my 2019 hike, in that I met a lot of people last year who literally had quit their jobs because they didn't worry about it. They knew they would get a job when they got back. They just wanted to have this experience, and I found that distinctly different to what it was in 2014. So I was wondering, when you look at the Camino that you went on in 2002, and then you were another 12 years between your Caminos, what was the difference in the Camino from then to more recently? Because it's become much more commercial, hasn't it?
It has become much more commercial. Yeah, I didn't really notice a huge amount in the amount of people on there. There could have been more. I think there probably was more, but I didn't really notice it was more busy. I did notice there was a lot more amenities. There was a lot more restaurants. There was a lot more bars, kind of catering for the hikers. Like outside, they, as you know, they have like a pilgrim's menu, which is a cheap sort of 3-course meal. So there's a lot of those, and there was a lot more advertising coming into villages and towns. Like, there'll be a sign up for this refuge or that refuge or this bar or this gear shop and all that sort of thing. So the commercial side was, I think that was probably the only change I really noticed.
Well, because once your hikes are over, certainly once my hike was over, my first hike was over, I said I'm never, ever, ever going to do this again. I put it in all sorts of presentations. I would never, ever do it again. And you know what? I went again, and I kind of wondered what it was. Was hiking a slow burner for you, or did it enthuse you that you wanted to get out there again? Did you know once you'd done your first long hike that you were going to do more, quite apart from the writing?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that everybody, when they finish a through hike, the first thing they think is, I'm never doing that again. And 2 weeks later, they're planning the next one.
Absolutely. Took me more than 2 weeks, but yeah.
Yeah. I've forgotten the question now. What was the question?
Well, was it a slow burner for you, or did you really want to get out there again?
I tell you what, the difference between doing the Camino and the PCT was 9 years. No, it was 8 years.
Right.
So that's a definite slow burner. And
you forget all the pain, don't you?
You do. And I think there's a gap between when you finish and when you go on your next one where, the physical pain and the mental kind of occasional mental stress when you're out there fades, and then it's replaced by all the good memories. And so it should be, because it's a fantastic experience.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So between the Camino and the PCT was definitely a slow burner. But that was because when I'd finished the Camino, I thought, not only did I not want to do another one, but it was just kind of like, I thought it was a one-off thing. I wanted to do a long hike, 1,000 miles. I did it. So I kind of ticked it off the checklist. And as time wore on, and I got more and more into this job, I was a painter and decorator at the time, and that started really to sort of grate on me. And at that point, I was sort of like, go and do another long hike. And the obvious candidate was the the PCT. But after the PCT, it was only 2 years between that and the AT, and 2 years between the AT and the attempt on the CDT. So when I came back from the PCT, I was definitely like, no, I want to do more of this. This is what I want to sort of do.
It's kind of a winning formula, isn't it? You've got successful books each time you've done it, so it's kind of, it's almost like you're going to get money from, you're going to advance your career, let's say, if you go and do a hike, don't you?
Yeah, it's a dream. It's a dream situation. I mean, 15 years ago, if you would have told me that's what I was doing, I'd have been like jumping around and thinking this is going to be fantastic. I can't wait, sort of thing. So it's a lovely situation to be in.
Now, I recommend people to go to your website, which is keithfoskett.com, isn't it?
That's it.
And people can find that your book's there, but it reveals a lot about you. Right on the homepage, the very first thing you see, it says, through hiking is not about giving up a few months of your life. It's about having a few months to live. So if that's how you feel about hiking, what are the non-hiking days of your life like? In other words, is your life very, very different? You know, and it is, because I know it is. So why do you feel that way? So such a great statement, I think.
I think because when I sort of listen to discussions and you see discussions on the web about people wanting to do through hikes, you often hear them say, I can't give up 6 months of my life, or I can't give my job up for 6 months, or my family, which are all great excuses. But it was kind of like, you know, you shouldn't be giving up your life. If anything, you should be doing it to improve it. It's kind of like they were trying to make excuses, people trying to make excuses not to do it. Yeah. And as the quote says, it's not about giving up 6 months of your life. It's about having 6 months to live. And it's probably probably the only situation, if you did do a through hike in your life, that you would have 6 months truly to live, or at least my definition of living. But I mean, in my normal sort of life, I sort of do some writing. Obviously, I try and take care of my existing books, and I'm actually more into my cycling these days than my hiking.
Yes, I know, yeah.
My cycling's kind of overtaken hiking to the point where I don't think at this point I'll do another long distance trail. But I mean, you say that, and
yes, exactly.
4 years time I could be on the CDT.
Yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
know.
Never say never.
No.
And your website is also typically British and self-deprecating, which I love that. It's a British trait that we all seem to have. We always take the piss out of ourselves, don't we?
We do, yeah.
And you say that you're referred to as an anomaly. Was that because you just had a bunch of different jobs? And what was that about?
No, that was, I think that was because, actually, do you know, I don't know why. I know who said it. It was a decorating job I did years ago. And my girlfriend used to live opposite the house where I was doing the decorating job. And she said she was having a chat with the guy I was working for one evening, and he described me as an anomaly. And I don't know why. I think maybe it wasn't long after I'd done the Camino. So all he knew about me at that time was I'd come back from 6 months working on a yoga retreat, and then went off to Spain to hike 1,000 miles, and then came back and starting up a painting and decorating business. And I think in between at some point as well, I was a dustman I did a temporary job as a dustman for a few weeks. So my life was kind of all over the place. And
that's a refuse collector for us Americans.
Yeah. So my life at that point, when he sort of knew about me, was just a mishmash of all sorts of things going on. So it was about as far from normal as you can get. I thought it was quite a nice term, actually. If you think about anomaly, you think it's a bit of a negative word, but I kind of quite liked it.
Oh, I do. I think it's great. I think it's an absolute compliment.
Yeah.
I really do. But I presume now that you're a full-time writer, aren't you? When you weren't a full-time writer, how were you able to get the time off work to follow this kind of drama mania of yours? Or have you been a full-time writer now since you did your first Camino thing?
My writing only really took off and went full-time in 2016, 17. It's been been about 3 or 4 years.
Recent as that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, really then, how did you get the time off then?
Well, before that, as I mentioned, I was a painter and decorator. That was from about 2008 to 2016, 17 when I started writing.
Right.
But I was self-employed. I didn't work for anybody. So,
all right, perfect. Perfect.
The PCT, I sent a load of emails out to my customers saying I'm away hiking for 6 months. I would love to sort of carry on working for you, doing your painting when I get back, and it
Cool.
went better than expected. So
I bet. Now, You've already mentioned this about getting the freedom and getting away and being by yourself and so on. And in your book, High and Low, the subtitle is How I Hiked Away from Depression Across Scotland. Has depression been something in your life for quite some time? So, is it something that you've lived with for quite a while?
I was only kind of diagnosed about 3 years ago.
Right.
I think I had it a lot longer than that, possibly going back to 2008, but I just didn't realise.
Right.
I think what happened was it got sort of steadily worse until I went to do this 600-mile hike across Scotland, which is what the book High and Low was about.
Sure.
And that's when it really, my depression, at that point I still had no idea. But I hit absolute rock bottom on that hike. I was in a hell of a mess. And when I got back home, it went to some very, very dark places, which I don't ever want to go back to again. But when it really hit rock bottom, I ended up, a friend, luckily, who knew the symptoms, said, you need to get up to the doctor. I think you've got depression. And I went up to the doctors, ended up breaking down in tears in front of the doctor. And he asked me a few questions, which I think is the standard, they listen for the answers and what to pick up on. And he said at the end of it, you've got depression. So
did you know you had an issue when you went on this hike in Scotland?
Oh, yeah.
Was that an attempt to get away from it then? Was it literally an attempt to get away from it?
Well, the Scottish hike was about 2 months after I got back from the CDT, so I recuperated, still had some of the summer left, and always wanted to hike across Scotland. So it was more a hike. I wasn't sort of going there to sort what I thought were any issues out, but for some reason, the black dog, as they call it, just decided to give me the most torrid 5 weeks of my life. I mean, Scotland was stunning, but it certainly doesn't help in terms of the weather. I think I worked out at the end of it that it was a 31-day hike, and it rained for 29 days of those 31.
Only 29?
Yeah, only 29. I thought I'd escape quite lightly.
Almost summer, high summer.
Obviously not all day and every day, but at some point during the day it rained. Sometimes it did rain all day. So, as much as we think going away to Scotland for 6 weeks is a great, would make a great hike, and it does. If it rains that amount every single day, it'll wear anybody down, and it really wore me down. And I think maybe I was still a bit physically weak from the CDT, so maybe it was a physical and a mental sort of weakness, but it just got worse and worse and worse. My original plan was to hit the Scottish border and then hike all the way back home, which would have been about probably another 800 miles. But I got to the border and I thought, I've hiked across Scotland, that'll do me. I can't do any more, and I came home. So
in your case, then, the hiking didn't help the depression; it just brought it out. Is that what you're saying? Well, the 29 days of rain.
I think it made. I think it was probably the rain. It made me realise that there was a definite problem. And as I said, a friend who sort of recognised the symptoms said you need to get up to the doctor, which I did. But I don't know. Sometimes it's still difficult to talk about it. Thankfully, I've sorted it out. I've made a lot of changes in my life, and I think the hardest part at the time was that you kind of think, you research depression, and there kind of seems to be two solutions. The first one is you take antidepressants, and you get to some sort of state of normality. Or the second one is you don't take antidepressants, and you've got it for the rest of your life. And I thought, hang on a second, I don't want to take antidepressants because it's not solving the problem. It's putting a Band-Aid over a cut. The cut's still there.
Of course.
And the stories you hear about people on antidepressants becoming addicted and all that sort of thing. So I didn't want to touch them. And I just refused to believe that I had something which I couldn't sort out by lifestyle changes.
Right.
And I did research and pick up all the little bits of information that I could, and I put it all together in a list. and I tried it, and I stuck it out. I did all those things on the list. A lot of it, some fun was nutrition. A lot of it was about sort of well-being, treating yourself
right,
well, looking after yourself, being healthy.
And was getting out in the open spaces all part of that as well, or not?
Yeah, that was almost three. Is it 3 birds and 1 stone? That's not right, is it? 2? No, it doesn't matter. You're kind of killing 3. You're kind of getting 3 reasons when you go out for a hike. The first is you've got physical exercise.
Bird in your hand is worth 2 in the bush.
Something like that, yeah.
Excellent.
The first one was physical exercise, which was one of the things
sure.
on the list. The second one was sunshine. And the third one was meditation, which you wouldn't think was the first thing you can do when you're hiking, but you can, simply enough. So, hiking helped a hell of a lot.
So I wonder what it is within hiking. So I met a bunch of people on the trail. I'm sure you did as well when you went, and any of the trails you've been on. Some people are out there because they have some sort of issues with it going on within them. I wonder what it is about hiking that mitigates someone's depression, or helps to mitigate someone's depression. And that may well be it: the sunshine, the fresh air, and the open spaces. Yeah,
sunshine, the fresh air, the exercise, all those things will, I think, pick anyone up to a certain extent.
Right.
But going back to the discussion earlier, again, is the headspace. All of a sudden you've got time to think about how you can sort yourself out, instead of being in this frantic world that we're normally in every day.
Right. So you just say you're doing more cycling now. You told me you got plantar fasciitis, is that right? So that makes hiking a bit more difficult anyway, doesn't it?
It does. I've spent the last 6 months trying to figure it out, and it doesn't get any worse on the bike, but it does get worse when I walk. So I've been walking less. I mean, it's certainly not a severe case. I could probably go out and do a 100-mile hike, but it wouldn't be in a very good state when I got back.
Nah, that's not a good thing, is it?
And I go for like maybe 1, maybe 2 walks a week, but every time I do walk, it seems to get worse. I'm tending to sort of back off it a little bit.
But if you're doing now some cycling, is there enough narrative in the cycling to start cycling books, a whole series of cycling books?
Yeah,
that'd be quite neat, wouldn't it?
It's panning into quite a good one. I kind of scratched my head at the start and thought, can you write a book on? I mean, it's not just cycling; it's essentially cycle racing, bike racing on the road.
Nice.
And it's something I've been wanting to do since I was about 16, and every single year I sort of put it off. And this year, even at the age of 52, which a lot of people would say is too old to be even thinking about cycle racing, but I've decided to do it. And obviously I was waiting. I mean, I've been trying. I did a lot of cycling the last couple of years, so my fitness level is okay, certainly good enough to race. And I was sort of waiting for April to come around when the weather warmed up and the racing season starts. And then obviously COVID-19 sprung up.
Terrible.
So the funny thing is I am still racing in the shed. I've got a trainer in the back garden with a TV screen, and I go online in something called Zwift, which a few of the listeners might be familiar with, but you can actually race virtually online. So it's kind of taken an interesting and a bit of a quirky turn, which I think might make for a good book.
There's your story. You should try to equate your cycling in your shed with something like the Tour de France, and report from there, and report from your shed as well.
You never know.
Just to finish on hiking, and I've asked this question before once or twice. When you're old and you're grey like me, actually you've got starting to grow.
Yeah, I've got some grey.
You're getting grey. Yeah. Which trail of all the ones that you've done will bring a smile to your face ahead of any of the others?
PCT, without doubt.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, they're all fantastic. And if you're talking about scoring them, the PCT would be 10 out of 10 and all the rest would be 9 out of 10. There's very little in it, but I think the PCT pips it. I think probably just because it's so diverse and such an incredible thing to experience when you're out there, especially, places like the Sierra Nevada but even the deserts, that's an amazing place. Washington and Oregon, all the forests and the mountains up there. It's just, I mean, I think epic is the word you can describe the PCT, and I don't think any others have matched it, albeit not.
I must say, it's one I would love to do. I just can't do the elevation. I've tried to do the John Muir Trail twice, and I can't go above about 9,700 feet. So unless they do a bit of mountaintop mining and cut all the tops of the mountains off, I won't be able to make it.
Can't you just run it or something? Get up and down really quick.
I'm 60. I'll be 68 this year. I can't trust me. Keith, I can't run it. Tell me. Let me tell you.
That's a shame. I know they say altitude sickness has no rhyme or reason to it. You could have someone that's completely unfit and that's fine, and you could have someone that's right on the top of their game.
That's right.
And it strikes them down.
Well, look, I really appreciate you coming on, and really hope I can do justice to your book. And I'm really looking forward to bringing it to the listeners. So thanks very much for letting me do it, and thanks for coming and being a guest on the show. I really appreciate it.
You're more than welcome, and I look forward to listening to it as well. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, mate. Cheers then.
Thanks. Take care.
Nice fella, eh? He seems to be a level-headed bloke, and we could both understand one another, so that always helps. Now, what about dromomania? I think that a lot of us have it, and even if we're not able to go on a long hike right now, and I think that my guests often fulfil that need in people to hear about other people's adventures. I know that if I was unable to get out on a trail and do a long hike, this is exactly the podcast I'd want to hear. I hope and I believe that some of you feel the same way. I can't wait to start recording Keith's book, and I hope that hearing from him today has piqued your interest as well. Now, Phoenix. And when I got that text on Thursday, I had a sense that all wasn't well. Here she is. Well, we're back on with Kate. Kate texted me on the Thursday morning,
Phoenix.
Which is unusual. So, firstly, how are you?
I'm doing okie dokie.
Okay.
It's been kind of an interesting 48 hours. I was in Lakeville this morning, headed to Salisbury,
Right.
but the night before, where the hell was I? I was at the Pine Swamp shelter.
The where?
Luna and I had made
Plain Swamp?
Pine
Pine Swamp. Okay.
Yeah, Pine Swamp Brook Shelter.
Okay.
And we headed there because we had heard that there was going to be major thunderstorms in the night.
Right.
So it was one of those things that, well, let's get there. And I guess at nightfall, a bunch of 20-something-year-old Novos, descended on the shelter site and set up tents and stuff. And so yesterday morning, we got the full display of one rooster, good-looking young man, and two young ladies who were cute as could be. They're all in their 20s having a great time. They had all started in Georgia, and it was so emblematic of what you were talking about, that whole camaraderie and the joy that emanated from them just
Cool.
because they were just, completely focused on partying and partying and getting down the trail and being happy, they not a care in the world kind of thing.
Perfect.
And and it was exactly what you had expressed that was so appealing to you, the human aspect. And with Luna, I had said that, I totally enjoy the campsite, shelter site when you meet people. And I didn't care whether they were section hikers or weekenders or through hikers, but that is sitting around and sharing the stories and sharing the experiences is such a part of who I am as a person. And it's very different when that's absent in your hike.
Yeah, I'd imagine, when we talked about it the other day, that is quite a loss for the class of 2020. So some of these trammelers that get together, they probably get pretty tight because there aren't that many other people on the trail, although I'm sure they're getting more and more now. So being in quite a tight tramley must be really nice for them. Yeah,
exactly. And, I'm bumping on 500 miles, so I know I can do the trail. And it was interesting because the next day, my ankle's been more and more swollen again.
Oh, wow.
And, so I've been ace bandaging it, and sometimes I have to redo it like 3, 4, 5 times a day.
Wow.
And yesterday, I literally couldn't stand on it. I felt like my foot was just broken. And so I hiked, but I was, doing like a mile an hour, and it was, every step was, tear would squirt out of my eyeball, kind of.
God.
I was like, and I went from totally, I'm going to Maine, to I'm done.
Oh.
I was in the middle of the trail. I sat down and I was like, I just can't take the pain anymore. It was 4+ weeks of daily, and it was getting better. And then it just, so anyway, and as you know, the trail provides, which is interesting, because we looked at Gut Hook, and Luna had decided actually to quit.
Oh, really?
But yeah.
Why does she want to quit?
Luna's personality is very much she describes herself as she lives by the seat of her pants day to day.
Mm-hmm.
And she's very much the lover, not the wife. In other words, she likes the immediate gratification of, so she's a through hiker by personality, where, okay, I'm going for 5 days.
Hang on, I've never heard that expression before. She's very much the lover, not the wife. That's hilarious.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, a through hike is like a really long marriage. And when you started in the middle, this is like when your kids are teenagers, you don't know who the hell you are anymore.
All right.
You sure as hell can't even figure out who your spouse is, So, and whereas a section hiker can do 3 days, 5 days, okay, beginning, end, I've done it. Yay, I get it. I get that fix. This long haul stuff requires planning, and it requires thinking beyond just a couple of days. It's, as you know, you've done it twice, and so I'm a long haul person, and I just got to a point where after 4 weeks of pain, because it had reversed and started getting worse instead of better.
Yeah.
And Connecticut's my favorite state so far.
Right.
Because it's got a little bit of everything that had come before. It has lots of real peaks, but it has bouldering, but it isn't a half a mile of bouldering. It's bouldering and you get over it. It introduces dirt and roots. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but some of the climbs are at 60, 65 degrees in dirt that hadn't been rained on in 3 weeks, so that you take a step and you slide down,
wow.
Kind of thing, which is fine. And so I liked Connecticut a lot, because I found that the terrain was both familiar and new and challenging, and all that I found very invigorating. But when every step, if you stop for 5 minutes, you've got 20 minutes to numb your foot out.
So, I mean, I'm listening now to you, and I'm still not sure whether you're still going or not. You said you're done?
Yeah. And so what we did is we found on Gut Hook a guy David, who had apparently in Lakeville, a hostel. So I called him. So he says, well, I have a room in the barn. And I was going, well, this doesn't sound right. And it turns out he had closed his hostel.
All right.
But he was still offering us a place to stay.
Okay.
And which was really, really sweet. And every step of the way thereafter, when we were going to have to walk a half a mile to a cafe, someone offered us a lift.
Sure.
And then he came and he picked us up, and we tented in his front yard. And it turns out he has a horse rescue place. Next year, if you wind up going on the trail, stop in and visit David. You will enjoy him. He made the whole conclusion very personally wonderful.
In what way? Tell me about that.
He's a very human and accessible, emotionally accessible person. He has group therapy sessions.
Right.
So just sitting and having intelligent conversation about a whole host of different subjects with a person who is well informed, but also open-minded, and just a very congenial but good person,
Right.
incredibly person.
So you made the decision to stop, and you went to his yesterday. Was it yesterday you went to him?
Yep.
Yeah. And
Yep.
how did you feel?
I feel so proud to have done virtually 500 miles. I know I can do it. What I can't do anymore is the pain with the foot. I'm going to the ER tomorrow to have it x-rayed and see. It is swollen like crazy. And even the left foot is now swelling because I'm putting so much more pressure on that.
I'm sure, yeah.
And it's the truth. There isn't anything about the trail that I don't think I can do, but I can't do it like this.
Sure.
And I'm at this point concerned that something is seriously or just basically broken.
Wow.
And so, but I'm very peaceful with the decision. My family did a huge lift to make this happen for me. And I had your support and so many friends who've supported this effort in terms of texting and phone calls. I'm incredibly proud to have done this, and especially the last 350 miles on a rolled ankle.
To be honest with you, as you know, I was getting worried for you. I expressed some of that this morning on the show as well. And at the end of the day, you can push through pain, but you can't push through something which may be damaged, and you certainly don't want to do yourself permanent damage, do you? So you've got to get that. You've got to get that resolved.
A spring chick. Yeah, I'm that woman of a certain age.
So,
and I'm telling you, there are no women out there anywhere close to my age.
I'm sure they're not. Are you?
No.
Have you got it in your mind that you might try again?
It's a funny thing. This was to be my year. COVID messed it up. I think my original plan was the perfect plan for me. We switched it up because I couldn't go Sobo at April 1, and that would have been the right choice because I would have seen all those wonderful Southern things while I got my legs, and then I would have enjoyed. I was so looking forward to the Whites. Right. I climbed Mount Washington 50 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, when I was a teenager, and I was looking forward to that. And the cost that it was involved for my family to pull themselves, everything together to make this happen for me was not an easy lift. So I have to be, and I am, okay with this is it.
Yeah.
It's done. My sister got up at 3:00 this morning, drove to Lakeville, picked me up at 8:00 this morning, and I am now home. Are
you? Wow. Well, that's a good thing to be back in something in your familiar home. That's obviously the best thing when you get in this situation. And as you say, you've done nearly 500 miles and about 70% of it with a dodgy foot. So what I suggest you do then, just go and find out what's happened and perhaps come on and chat next week and just see how you are, and just give us an update on if what happened to you. And because I'm sure they'll find out you've either sprained it or broken it, and a sprain's often worse than a break, isn't it?
Well, I definitely sprained it. They told me that in Hamburg, Pennsylvania, when I went into the urgent care.
Yeah, sprains awful. Sprains are awful.
Yeah, but I declined an X-ray because I really wasn't going to stop.
Right. Okay.
But obviously, things have. They were improving, but they have deteriorated. And I would love to. I'm sorry that I pulled the plug on this in terms of my relationship with you on air. And this is the only time that I've been expressing myself on this. I haven't been on Facebook. I haven't promoted any aspect of this. I was doing this for me.
Sure.
I've learned, I'd love to talk to you more about what has solidified for myself in this journey.
Well, if you're happy to do that on air, great. But if you want to do it off air, that's also fine. So, I think what you need to do is get yourself resolved in terms of your ankle.
Yeah.
And then circle back and we'll talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. I mean, certainly I'd like, quite apart from the show, I'd like to know how you are, make sure you're okay. But if there's something you can glean from this that's beneficial to you and will help other people as well on the trail, then I'd love to have you back on the show as well.
Okay. Well, that would be wonderful. And one of the things that has been a wonderful takeaway for me is looking forward to chatting with you and sharing not so many shenanigans, unfortunately, but just the journey. And it has been, I haven't had the shenanigans that I witnessed with those young people.
Yes.
Nothing like watching this young man doing yoga, push-ups and pull-ups in front of these girls. It was interesting. And I was like, I'm watching a Fellini movie.
Us guys can't help it. It was fantastic.
I'm telling you, it was like watching a Fellini movie.
Marvelous.
It was, and it's so cool and it's so good. And
it is, isn't it? It's great.
It was uplifting to see that kind of joy, spontaneous joy and nonchalance by these young people who were having such a good time.
I totally get it. Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing.
Well, okay, don't ever worry about the show. The show was really to follow your journey, see how you did with it, and you got injured. I mean, no one can be ready for being injured. Yeah. But as I say, I'd love you to give it some thought, and when you're ready to talk again, come on the show and tell us what you have learned about it, and obviously tell us how your ankle is as well. Okay,
that would be great. All right,
stay safe, and I'll speak to you soon. All
right, thanks, Steve.
Cheers then. Bye.
Cheers.
Did you notice how long it took her to tell me that she was actually off the trail? It must have been so difficult for her. She hasn't let me down any more than she's let herself down. She got off her ass and put in a shift of nearly 500 miles on a tough trail in a very tricky year. That should be a source of pride for anybody. And when she's reflected further, I think we're going to have her back on to chat about everything. By the way, I spoke with Ryan yesterday. Remember Ryan? JR? He's in a far better place after the disappointment of having to curtail his hike so early this year, and he's still going to get about maybe getting out to do the AT sometime in the future. I'm going to stay in touch with him because he's such a solid individual, and I always enjoy chatting with him. Thanks, as always, to those of you who support the show with a donation. If you'd like to do that, just head on over to mightyblueontheat.com, click on the podcast page where, after a bit of scrolling, you'll see a donate button. Believe me when I tell you that your donation, whatever you give, goes a long way to extending the life of these podcasts, and I so appreciate your generosity. Now, the first little extra. I received an email recently from RTK, or Bruce Matson. He had an idea and wanted my input and my time. As both are pretty cheap right now, I was happy to oblige. Bruce had an idea which falls under the category of giving back to the trail. Let's hear from Bruce and Neville Harris of Woods Hole Hostel. Well, I'd like to introduce to you all a couple of friends of mine. There's Bruce RTK Matson and Neville Harris. Hi, guys. How are you?
Hey, good morning. Doing great.
Now, you may be wondering why we've got the owner of a hostel, which is Neville. Clearly not Bruce is not the owner of a hostel, and a thru hiker. But Bruce is always thinking about what he can do next. Almost irritatingly so, Bruce. Would you not agree?
Part of my nature, always thinking about what's next.
Yes, and he's thought of a great idea, which I'm going to ask him to introduce his idea to you guys. So, where you go, Bruce. Tell people what you've been thinking about.
Okay, thanks. Well, just before we had this shutdown, I actually drove from, I'm fortunate to live in Central Virginia, and you're not too far from Waynesboro. If you think about it, you can drive from Waynesboro all the way down to Springer Mountain on roads and not be too far from the trail. And so I was doing that to talk about and share the Platinum Blazing book that Sharkbait and I came out with. And I spent some time with Neville on the way south, and we thought of this idea of getting prospective thru hikers together. You know, it's been a tough year for everybody who is associated with the trail. restaurants and shuttle drivers and hostels. And I thought it would be great to bring people to Woods Hole and to talk about a thru hike, and particularly about having a chance to prepare for a thru hike by talking to people who've already completed it. As you know, Steve, and many of your listeners know from the podcast you did with me, I'm a big on preparation, and I would have loved to have the opportunity to sit around and talk to a bunch of successful thru hikers. So the idea of getting people to sort of talk about a hike in the next year or two because they couldn't hike this year, and the idea of helping a hostel owner. And, I'm a little biased, but the best single stop on the whole Appalachian Trail, in my opinion, is spending a day or two with Neville at Woods Hole. And so all that kind of came together in my mind to say, and I guess I have to say, as you often say, I always love talking about hiking the AT. So an excuse to sit around with inspirational people and talk about one of my favorite topics is an easy thing for me to get convinced to do. So Neville liked the idea, and we thought about bringing you and others on to put this thing together.
Well, that's a cool idea, and I'm going to come on to in a minute who we're talking about and who's going to be at the event. But Neville, tell us, how's the season gone? It must have been such a strange 2020 for you. How has it felt for you?
It's been a different year. We've had to make a lot of unique and hard and difficult decisions, and always trying to stay on the right side of things. In the beginning, we decided to close. Well, in the beginning, we decided to only stay open to thru hikers and close our doors to anyone in a driving capacity. Right. And then we decided to close. And then we saw that the thru hikers were still out there. So we very quietly, without any announcement or anything, reopened. And then with the state of Virginia reopening, I decided to open to the drive-in perspective. But it's been a different year. The hikers have had a very unique hike. And so it's been a quieter hiker season. It's been a therapeutic hiker season because it hasn't been nearly as busy. I really like this idea that Bruce had because I thought it was a phenomenal way to support people that are interested in getting on the trail, but also to give us all something to look forward to in the hopes that we can gather. So I guess we should touch a bit on COVID-19. We may be dreaming a bit to be able to do this fall, but isn't it nice to dream?
Well, look, we're now recording this at the very end of June, and we're talking about the weekend, I think, of the 2nd and 3rd, or 3rd and 4th and 5th of October. Is that right? Something like that?
Yeah, that's the 2nd and 4th of October.
2nd to 4th of October. So, why can't we dream? I mean, there's still a few months to go, and there's a good chance, hopefully, that this thing will start to be under control. We just never know. And that's always going to be the caveat for this. We know that. And what have you been doing then in terms of preparing and coping with COVID-19, especially with your guests this year?
So we're keeping everybody separated. If a guest reserves, we're keeping the bunkhouse at minimum. It has 13 capacity, and we're putting only 6 in there. Unless you have a group of, we've had an occasion where a group of 7 thru hikers came in. And so we allowed that allowance because they were already hiking together. We have private spaces. So we've been able to accommodate people with the sense that we have 5 private spaces, and we have a capacity for 6 in the bunkhouse. And then we have an overflow for camping. So with that in mind, this idea has kind of spawned into, as Bruce suggested, a very small and intimate gathering with some very unique people that you guys have put together. I'm kind of excited about who you put together.
Well, let's share that. Yeah. Bruce has reached out in his charming way and asked if people will volunteer their time for free, which is wonderful. And so we're getting nothing for this at all. So he's reached out to me, Clay Bonneman Evans, Pony, who also did a thru hike, Julie Jester Gayhart, who is my fellow podcaster on the Hiking Radio Network. She's section hiked the trail I think say 2 or 3 times. She's on her second or third one now. I'm not quite sure. And Chunky from the Quarter Way In, and also somebody from the ATC. What have we tied down who that's going to be then, Bruce?
We think so. Talked to them a few times, and they're very supportive of being part of this. They obviously want to get confirmation from us that we're going to be sort of COVID compliant, that I'm assured them that we're going to do that. But our expectation is that we're going to have a younger woman who's a thru hiker, who is certified in Leave No Trace. And I think it rounds out our sort of panel of presenters really well.
Right. And you put together, which we haven't changed hardly at all, actually, Bruce, have we, in terms of what you originally put together, ideas for what's needed to be successful on a thru hike. So what's it? Do you have a brief overview of the event, when it starts and when, because we're going to do a bit of a practice hike, aren't we? And then we're going to get there, and we've got various different sections of the program. Have you got a quick brief overview of that? Sure.
And no, it's been it's been fun putting it together. Planning is part of the process, and I find that to be fun. And I love, Neville saying we all need to be looking forward to something. And hope is important in life. And I'm very hopeful that we're going to be able to do this, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So they're not terribly unique topics. I think they're the topics that people would expect. The big thing for me, and I think the more I have talked to people and thought about my own hike, is the mental aspect of the hike is, in my opinion, the single most critical. And and having a bunch of people have done it and having their insights would be really helpful. We're certainly going to do some presentation on gear. Since we have 5 or 6 thru hikers, the idea is that we would break the group down into very small groups of 1 or 2 and have individual shakedowns, so we could have personalized attention to thru hikers who are thinking about going, and then many other topics that you might think about. We wanted to have Q&A, so we weren't just telling people what we wanted them to hear, but we were responsive to what's on their mind. We're going to have a great opportunity to, sit around a fire, to have a meal together, and there should be a lot of opportunity to have both more formal presentations on topics that you would expect, but also informal conversation about not just the excitement, but some of the challenges too. I do want to touch on the practicum, as I mentioned. For those who want to, we're going to start a day early or half a day early, and literally, hike into Dismal Falls, which is only about a 2-mile hike, but it works well. You'll hike with all your gear, and we'll set up together. I'd like to, use that opportunity to have part of our Leave No Trace presentation, but we'll also just talk about the campsite and tenting, and we'll do that together. We'll do some water filtering, we'll do cooking, and we can do all that on a Thursday afternoon, Thursday night, and then we all will get our way to Woods Hole for lunchtime, and the welcome for those who aren't doing the practicum. Dismal Falls is really close to Neville, and it just works out really well conveniently where we can have a chance to do that for people who are interested.
Cool. Very well. And in fact, the last couple of days has been a back and forth between Bruce, Neville and Clay about the design of the, not a brochure, it's a PDF, kind of mini brochure. Where can people get details of the event in Neville? Where have you put it?
We're going to put a splash page on the cover page of Woods Hole Hostel's website. And I'll say that website in just a second. And then we're going to provide a link to a page on the website underneath the welcoming page. Sure. So if you are interested in gaining more information, you can go to woodsholehostel.com, www.woodsholehostel.com.
Cool. And we've had a bit of back and forth about the price. It's not desperately expensive. It's relatively cheap, in fact, for what it is. I need you to go to the website to look it up. It's okay. I'm not going to, and the only reason I'm saying this, I'm not sure we've actually decided what the price is yet, but we'll have to work that one out.
We've got what we've got is, I'll go ahead and say it. What we've got is a ballpark idea that the package weekend will be for either bunkhouse or camping, $250. And if you would like a private space for one or two people, you've got $350. And we would like to open this up with the idea that if cost it prohibits you from coming, but you are still passionate about coming, please do not hesitate, and please do not make money the inhibiting factor. We would very much appreciate your reaching out to us. So yeah.
Okay, well that's reach out to Neville then. we'll work that one out. But look, I think it's a great idea, Bruce. I think it's a terrific idea that you've thought enough about it and about Woods Hole and about everything else, and hopefully it's going to be a great success. I'm really hopeful that people see the value in it for the hiking community and for the hostel community as well. And thanks, guys, for coming on and talking to us.
Thanks for having us on.
Take it easy. Bye.
All right, take care. Cheers.
So that's the idea. If you intend to try a through hike next year or maybe the year after, and you'd like to get some valuable input from people who've done it before, then head on over to woodsholehostel.com. That's woodsholehostel.com, where Neville promised to have the details of it up on a website today. It isn't going to be expensive, and you'll gain a lot of knowledge, camaraderie, and understanding what it's actually like to put your life on hold for 6 months and really live in the woods. And you'll be doing it in one of the best places on the entire trail. Let me know what you think. Now, the next little bonus. With Kate now at home, there's a vacant spot for our middle section, so with the trail still housing hikers, I thought to myself, who can I get to tell about their hike this year? Some of you have probably been following a bloke called Sean Campbell, or Bounce the Hiker, Bounce then DA Hiker on YouTube. I met Sean last year and, well, he's back on the trail, having had to leave last year with an injury. So I called him up. Here's Sean, or Bounce. Well, I'd like to introduce you to somebody I met last year. His name's Bounce. Firstly, hi, Bounce. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Mighty Blue?
Well, yeah, we met last year, and I was kind of confused to see you back out on the trail this year. And obviously, it's been quite a year for you this year. Tell us what happened last year and why you're back out there this year.
So my plan was to hike a flip-flop starting in Pennsylvania, and I made it to Vermont, broke my foot in Vermont, walked on that broken foot into 20 miles into Maine, and I just couldn't do it anymore. It kind of daisy-chained up the knee into the hip, and I couldn't make it through the notch. So
yeah, I bet. So
I got off.
So that must have felt devastating, I suspect, at the time. And I seem to remember you were in business to a relatively high level at some stage, and that you've decided this wasn't a life you liked?
Yeah, I was a senior solutions architect, program manager for a large organization that serves federal agencies.
But you decided that wasn't what you wanted to do anymore. You wanted to go and hang out on the trail. Well,
actually, for me, I realized that the material that I was building wasn't really for me. And I joined the Army after 9/11, so I kind of went on this trajectory in a direction that kind of was planned out, in a sense, where I kept getting opportunities to grow. But was that really me? Yes. I'm not sure. And so that's what I'm out here doing.
And did the 700 miles last year confirm to you that you're where you wanted to be?
It confirmed to me that I was amongst a community of people that is separated from the crowd. And it's kind of that knife's edge of just hard people that know how to accomplish things. And that's what I want to surround myself with.
I got that impression last year, funnily enough. We had a couple of chats. So you came back home and you decided to do a through hike this year. Then, of course, everything happened. So when did you actually start this year? And did you start in Georgia, by the way?
Yeah, I started Amico Falls on March 6th, actually. I had to zero at Black Gap Shelter because I brought a dollar poncho. got soaked. So I didn't start the AT until the 7th.
I'll tell you what, man, whoever invents a way to keep yourself dry and cool on the trail will be a grillionaire, won't they? It's impossible. It's just impossible to cope with rain. Well, I found it is anyway. So you started March 7th eventually then in that case. And then everything closed down, didn't it? Did it close down almost straight away after you got going?
By about Hot Springs, that's when the corona was like in complete, nobody knows what it is. We were packing 10 days worth of food because who knows if you can get into town. People were like telling me they were angry at me. So I put out a video saying everybody stay on trail.
Right.
So, yeah.
So how did that work? How did that work out though? Did you? Because I know I've followed you quite a few of your videos actually, and there was a point where you said maybe I'm misquoting you. You said something like there's virtually nobody around. There's only about 4 or 5 people around within about 200 miles.
Oh. Yeah, I mean there was days because I was hiking pretty fast in the south, so I would hike up through groups, and there got to a point where, I mean, I in the Shenies, I walked naked most of the time. I did not see a single Sobo. I just was walking naked. Like nobody was around. It was just me and some bears.
That was funny. You had a loincloth, and the video of the loincloth was bloody hilarious.
Sure.
So how has it affected your mindset? You know, you must have been by yourself a heck of a lot. And I know you took a week or two off to stay with some friends, didn't you?
Yeah, so I stopped in Pennsylvania for 2 weeks. You know, it's been great being able to be in shelters, and it's like there's enough people around, and the type of people around. There's not a lot of naysayers, negative people. These are people that love the trail, want to be on the trail. The extraordinary, like the town stuff, wasn't why they were here. So it's thinned the herd a little bit, and I personally am having a great time. Really?
And do you notice obviously the difference? I presume you notice the difference between this year and last year. Do you enjoy less people on the trail, or would you still like it to be as many as last year? Because it was kind of it was such a fun thing. Like, for me, it was a great fun thing to meet everybody last year.
So for me, it's like kind of like that's a double-edged sword because I love hiking and I want more hikers. But the Appalachian Trail is a busy trail, and to get this experience of having it like nearly to myself at most times, camping by myself, not passing anybody, seeing onesie twosies. It's been incredible.
Have there been any encounters that were disturbing to you or not? You know, in terms of people being anti you being on the trail.
In the beginning in the South, I've met some people like camped out in the woods. One guy writes for the Trek was trying to convince me to get off. It was in the beginning, but you know that seems to have subsided, and a lot of flip-floppers came on, so it's a little busier now than it was, you know, most of the South. I'm sure.
Now you're just short of Greylock, you say, so you're in Massachusetts. So what the plan is? Hopefully, we can follow you all the way to Katahdin. How are you feeling? You feeling physically strong?
My legs are very strong. I got a real tight soreness in my back for the past couple of weeks. I've started pushing huge miles. I'm going to go meet Sharktooth before she goes to Colorado and does that trail. So,
oh, cool!
Had to make it.
You got to do that, definitely. Well, look, I'm going to catch up with you in the next week. This was just to introduce you to people. By the way, we haven't actually said your real name, or do you not want to share that?
Oh, that's fine. My name's Sean Campbell.
Sean Campbell. Okay.
But I'm Bounce the Hiker online.
You are indeed, yeah. And I'm going to share your YouTube channel. It is funny, and I look forward to catching up with you during the week, and we'll just give an update of your progress every week. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Mighty Blue.
Appreciate it, mate. Take it easy.
Good to hear from you.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
He's such a laid-back guy. I thought it would be fun to follow his progress in the northern states. So for the next few weeks, that's exactly what we're going to be doing. More from Bounce next week. If you want to follow him on YouTube, he's at Bounce the Hiker, and I'll have the link in the show notes. So it's been quite a long show again today, and I'd normally go straight to Grandma Gatewood to sign off. But I couldn't let this week's episode go by without recognising the passing of one of my friends from the class of 2019, Pony Keg. In fact, he was also a member of the class of 2018 because he did a Sobo, so I'm sure that many of you will remember him from that. He went home to get a bit of a rest after his Sobo, then got back on the trail and headed north last year when I met him. Pony Keg, and I don't know his real name, which I think is entirely appropriate for the trail, was instantly recognisable. He wore a light blue onesie that had, I think they were yellow or green, aliens all over it, and he was accompanied by his truly awesome pit bull, a strapping 120-pounder called Blue, who used to stride out and was beyond doubt the gentlest dog I've ever seen. Even I let him lick my hand, and I never let a dog do that to me. And that was more of a testament to Ponycake, how he loved that dog. I'd see him some afternoons carrying his own huge pack, plus the pack he had for his dog, because he cared so much about the dog. For me, though, I'm always going to remember Ponycake for how he would greet everybody. He wasn't afraid of expressing how pleased he was to see you. He'd give you a big hug and actually whisper in your ear, "Really pleased to see you, man." Well, Ponycake was a beautiful, unique soul, and the world is a whole lot poorer for no longer having his spirit in it. I'll see you next week. Chapter 18. Again. 1957. On April the 12th, when she was all alone at home, Emma Gatewood quietly sewed a new bag out of a yard of denim, large enough to carry a few items of clothing, gear, first aid supplies and food. On April the 16th, she babysat her grandchildren, and they did not behave, and she wrote in a diary, "I'll be glad when I can get away." On April the 22nd, she bought a Timex wristwatch for $14 and watched a man in the bus station take the screws out of the hinges on a telephone booth with a coin and then walk away. On April the 24th, she went to Mrs. Church's house and sat on the porch for a while with Lanny Thompson's little girl, then caught a ride with Mrs. Jacquie to Northup, then down the road and past the old family homestead high on the hill, then on up Raccoon Creek to Edith's place. On the way back, she went to Dr. Allison's to get her false teeth, which were ready for pickup, and to Dr. Thomas's to get a screw for her glasses. Then she packed a suitcase, grabbed a coat, went up to Monroe's for the night so she could leave bright and early to catch the bus to Charleston, then the plane to Atlanta, then the bus to Jasper, then the taxi to Mount Oglethorpe. It had been 19 months since she stood on Mount Katahdin. She'd had 2 birthday parties and thousands of those little moments that make a civilised, nice, normal life of rhubarb pie and dirty dishes of pot roast and burping babies. Now, 2 weeks before Mother's Day 1957, 6 months before her 70th birthday, the Appalachian Trail was calling her back. In May 1957, a journalist named Murray T. Pringle wrote a story for American Mercury called "Tried Walking Lately?", which pointed out that Americans had become irreversibly dependent on the automobile. No American generation has walked less than the present one, or has paid less heed to Thomas Jefferson's dictum that, of all exercises, walking is the best. The card arrived at Lucy's house in Columbus, Ohio, marked Caratunk, Maine. September the 7th, 57. Dear Lucy, Louise et al. There was a reception of about 20 meeting me at the river yesterday evening. 2 reporters, 4 forest wardens and others. I think I will be through in 10 days. I have taken so much time off to visit, or could have done. I am fine and having the time of my young life. Hoping all is fine with you. I am, with love, Mama. Mount Katahdin, Maine, September the 16th, AP. Mrs. Emma Gatewood, a 69-year-old grandmother from Gallipolis, Ohio, will climb Mount Katahdin's 5,267-foot peak today, after completing her 2,026-mile hike along the Appalachian Trail. It was the second triple on the trail for Mrs. Gatewood. She is the first woman to have completed the journey in its entirety in one season. She started the trip from Mount Oglethorpe, Georgia, on April the 27th and arrived here yesterday. They called her Queen of the Forest. In 1955, she was the first woman to thru-hike alone. In 1957, she became the first person, man or woman, to walk the world's longest trail twice. She reached the Katahdin summit nearly blind because her glasses kept fogging over during the climb, so she simply took them off. I could not see, she wrote in her diary. It made me plenty nervous getting down over all those rocks, but I slowly made it without accident. She descended the mountain with a spate of new stories. Getting too old, she told a reporter at the bottom of the mountain. There were places where I had to pull myself over sheer rocks, and I'm afraid I'll get to the age where I won't be able to do that anymore. She had walked within 6 feet of a rattlesnake in May in the Georgia foothills. She backed away, waited 10 minutes for the snake to move, then cut around through the woods, leaving the sassy thing rattling. About her lack of nourishment a few days later, she wrote, I was so tired and my knees felt weak from lack of food. I wobbled when I walked. At her weakest, she approached an unpainted shack to ask for food. Dogs ran up barking and a man with a peg leg appeared on the porch. The place looked so poor that she did not expect to find a meal, but the peg-legged man had heard about Emma's hiking and sent her away with boiled eggs, corn pone, stewed beef, an onion, and a can of condensed milk. An old mutt followed her from Tennessee to Virginia and into a store where she bought new shoes and left her old high tops and the dog. On June the 14th, she saw her first bear coming down the trail. She shouted, "Hey!" and the bear loped off. She was bitten by something, she didn't know what, near Roanoke, and her leg swelled to the knee. It grew so bad she begged a ride to the doctor. She didn't tell him who she was or what she was doing for fear he'd try to stop her. He gave her penicillin, the first she'd ever had, and also some pink pills he did not identify. She spent the rest of the day on the couch of a stranger who waited on her as though she were an invalid. Her foot ached for days and made walking painful. On June the 27th, she walked through Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. "No one recognised me," she wrote in a journal. "Still think I'm a tramp." She spent a solid July day in Pennsylvania, not talking to Dorothy Laker, who would become the second woman to through hike by herself. "I started before 5, but it was not long until Laker passed me. I did not talk to her. Then I passed her, on and off all day, but never saying a word to each other. Laker, in her own account of the day, doesn't mention Emma at all. It's hard to know why the two didn't speak. Competition, maybe?" In August, Emma walked up on a shelter occupied by Boy Scouts and saw their leader sitting outside in his birthday clothes. On the best nights, she was greeted warmly by friends she had made 2 years before and slept on comfortable mattresses in climate-controlled houses. On unlucky nights, she found shelter beside ant-infested logs, or on piles of leaves or grass, or on one rainy evening inside a large pasteboard box that surprisingly kept her fairly dry. She slept under the trailer of a long-haul 18-wheeler and in the posh Bear Mountain Inn, and at the Laurel Ridge Tourist Home, where she wrote, "There was so much noise all night by giggling girls and indecent sounds I did not sleep much. I would have liked to have thrown a lot of things downstairs." She even made a bed one night in the Amen corner of an abandoned country church. In New York, she witnessed an AWOL soldier turn himself in to the state police. In Connecticut, she rode in a parade on board a fire engine with the volunteer fire department. In several towns where word of her travels arrived early, folks hosted welcoming partners that made Emma feel special. One woman, upon recognising her, gave Emma a kiss that could be heard around the block. On the path, the beauty of nature fulfilled her. She gazed at a mountainside violet with a purple tip, like an orchid. She watched a wood pewee feed her babies in a nest in the corner of a lean-to. A wild turkey crossed her path. She was resting one afternoon on a thick, moss-covered log, daydreaming, when a red fox came jogging down the path, carrying small prey in its mouth, oblivious to the old woman lying on the log. She watched it come near, then asked, "Are you bringing me my dinner?" The fox shot through the forest like a red streak. She hadn't kept this hike a secret. Like she had the last, she sent postcards home from Clinman's Dome in Tennessee. She was sending cards to all of us at different times and from different places, Nelson told me. She was hiking 14 miles a day, so we intercepted her. We went up east to Harrisburg, to Lehigh Gap, Pennsylvania, and here she came. We took her to dinner there, and the next morning we hiked up the rock formation called Devil's Pulpit. She was having a good time. She just talked about the trail, told us about things she had run across, told us about the bear. She met reporters too, nearly everywhere she went. Even more so than the first trip, this journey was well documented in American newspapers, magazines, and on television. "Some people think it's crazy," she told one reporter, "but I find a restfulness, something that satisfies my type of nature. The woods make me feel more contented." "What made you do all of this?" a reporter asked. "The forest is a quiet place, and nature is beautiful. I don't want to sit and rock, I want to do something." She told them she found the trail in better condition that year. Her initial criticism had prompted hiking clubs to clean and mark parts of the trail. That was also part of the reason she finished the hike in fewer days. Before she left Millinocket, the Chamber of Commerce presented her with a blue and grey suit. She spoke to the students and teachers at the local high school. She spent part of one day baking special cookies, then delivered them to patients at the Millinocket Community Hospital. Back home in Gallia County, she was the talk of the town. The Blue Devil Marching Band played theme music to honour her at a Friday night football game. The Chamber of Commerce presented her a plaque at half-time and declared it Grandma Gatewood Night. "I'd like to go to the South Pole," she told a group of Gallipolis Rotarians who invited her to speak, "but nobody will take me there. There's no need for old ladies at the South Pole. I guess they have their own cooks." The Queen of the Forest posed with politicians and told her story at school assemblies. She addressed the Palmerton Over 60 Club and the League of Ohio Sportsmen and welcomed even more reporters to sit and chat. Mrs. Gatewood possesses a wonderful sense of humour, one wrote. She reports having had a good laugh all by herself near the beginning of a hike. She had lain down to rest under a tree and after a bit quite unconsciously moved her arm and frightened away a buzzard that was about to light. She thought to herself, I'm not ready to have my bones picked yet. With the second AT hike complete, she began striking out elsewhere. She spent 8 days and nights on the Baker Trail in Pennsylvania, and when she stopped in Aspinwall on the Allegheny River, she spent 3 weeks at the Red Wing Girl Scout camp, chopping trees, setting up tents and preparing the camp for winter. She was invited to a week-long retreat at Cantor's Cave 4-H Camp in Ohio, 43 miles from her home. She walked there. In 1958, at age 70, she climbed 6 mountains in the Adirondack Range and expressed interest in joining the 46ers, a club of men who had climbed all 46 Adirondack peaks of more than 4,000 feet. Occasionally she'd ask a young relative or friend to accompany her, but she was careful not to bend societal norms. When an old man asked to join her on an extended hike, she declined. People would talk, she said. She had become an evangelist for walking, for experiencing nature at a time when pedestrianism in America was in steep decline. She wrote of its benefits often in flowery poems. The reward of nature. If you'll go with me to the mountains and sleep on the leaf-carpeted floors and enjoy the bigness of nature and the beauty of all out of doors, you'll find your troubles all fading and feel the Creator was not man, that made lovely mountains and forests, which only a supreme power can. When we trust in the power above and with the realm of nature hold fast, we will have a jewel of great price to brighten our lives till the last. For the love of nature is healing if we will only give it a try, and our reward will be forthcoming if we go deeper than what meets the eye. She didn't reveal her plans for the next big hike, but soon enough everyone would know.